A formal welcome for Prime Minister Mark Carney from Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. The Prime Minister has traveled south to try to deepen ties with an ally as both countries adapt to a new relationship with their shared neighbor and to further develop the Canada-Mexico trading relationship. Well, the Power Panel is here to talk about what we can expect from this trip and others just like it. Andrew Thompson is a former Saskatchewan NDP cabinet minister. He's in Toronto. And here with me in the studio, Peter MacKay is a former Conservative cabinet minister. Michelle Cadario was deputy chief of staff to former Prime Minister Paul Martin. And Tana McCharles is the Ottawa bureau chief for the Toronto Star. Okay. Andrew, too bad you couldn't make it, but you're always welcome here at the table. All right. Michelle, let's start with you. I mean, it is interesting when you go back to where this year started, where a lot of public figures and first ministers were saying, let's just cut Mexico out of this and preserve the U.S. And today, the prime minister's in Mexico City. What do you make of the attempt here?
Well, I think he's rightfully making up some ground. It was kind of in the panic of everything that was happening early in the new year that it was very much, it was elbows up and elbows up for ourselves, as we saw the Americans kind of doing that for themselves. But now, all of a sudden that market of 80 million people, that's pretty close to us, and at least on the continent with no ocean in the middle. Seems like a pretty good place to try and be selling our goods. We have a free trade agreement with them. They are a key partner in terms of CUSMA and trying to hopefully negotiate something that works for all of us, but especially works for Canada. And so I think the Prime Minister's right. He did the first overture at the G7 meeting, inviting her here. And now he's going down to her turf, and hopefully that they have really productive meetings and can kind of further our own relationship with Mexico, saving aside the agenda that we might have with the United States.
Peter MacKay, if you're going to do a lot more trade with Mexico and kind of avoid the U.S. a little bit, you're going to need to upgrade the ports in Canada because you're going to need to up your shipping capacity. But how do you think the U.S. views this as Canada and Mexico strategize and maybe pivot a little bit?
I don't think they're paying attention, quite frankly. I think that they've partially moved on, hence the president is in the UK, he's all over Europe, he's been to the Asia Pacific. It'll be interesting to see if our Prime Minister can pick up a little bit of intel on how she's been dealing with the United States. I think it's a good idea, frankly, that we're there, there's no doubt, on security, on the economy, on energy. We actually receive more Mexican goods than they're buying from us right now, so it would be an opportunity for a bit of a sale. We know that Minister Champagne, Minister Anand were there just a few months ago. They didn't get the type of traction, I think, that was put out there, that was part of the narrative. So having the Prime Minister there, I think, is impactful, right, and can certainly send a message that we're serious about diversifying trade with other countries. And let's not forget, as was stated, we do have a free trade agreement with them now. Yes. We should be capitalizing on that, as we should be with the Europeans and with others in the Asia Pacific. We should be really upping our game in trade with other countries. That's part of the approach. It's elbows down with the United States, but let's get out there and hustle when it comes to trade with other countries.
Well, Andrew, they are supposedly signing a document, signing an agreement, maybe similar to the European stuff we saw earlier this year that may build on those earlier trips by Minister Anand and Minister Champagne. But what do you expect to hear from the Prime Minister in an hour and a half or so, and what do you think they want from this?
Yeah, I expect it'll be fairly incremental. I mean, obviously the points that have been made are important about it as a trading market. There's one other benefit, though, that Mexico brings to the table, and they've not been able to exploit it under the previous president, AMLO, who was there. And that is that Mexico is a low-cost manufacturer, and it has an opportunity to help counterbalance the dependence on China as a manufacturing center. And I think this is one of the things that has really got to be watched within the next phase of where CUSMA goes, is how do you balance those kind of global security concerns that are sitting there. And I think that'll be one of the issues that is certainly being kind of tested, is how much Mexico can be trusted to come into that kind of a partnership as a trusted partner, perhaps a more secure partner, and one that can counterbalance China. The Mexicans are making huge investments in infrastructure right now, getting ready to take advantage of more trade opportunities. And I think that this is one of the issues that will certainly be on the agenda, even if it doesn't make it into the agreement.
Tana, what are you watching for when we hear the results of this?
Well, one of the things that the Canadian officials have been flagging this week to journalists is that it's not just about an economic strategic alliance and partnership, but also on the security side, and we haven't touched on that here. They hope to combine efforts and sort of, I guess, coordinate in the face of Trump's condemnations of both countries that they're not doing enough on security. So there's an effort there to make some alliances. But look, I think that we've seen it wasn't just sort of recently with the premiers who kind of, tried to set Canada apart from Mexico with Trump. It's been a relationship that's had its ups and downs for a couple of decades right now. And so to see an attempt at a reset is encouraging. I wish them well. However, I think that, the proof is in what coordinated or common or united front they both bring to the table when it comes to the CUSMA trilateral trade pact negotiation that's about to happen. Even though we're only calling it a review, it's pretty clear that the Trump administration views it as a chance to renegotiate. And to what extent Canada and Mexico can find common cause there, that's what I'm watching for.
Okay, I do want to talk a bit about the U.S. in this, because while Prime Minister Carney looks to bring Canada and Mexico closer, as he also works to repair, I guess would be the word, the relationship with the United States. Take a listen to how the U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, characterized that relationship today.
It is very, very difficult to find Canadians who are passionate about the American-Canadian relationship. Okay? You ran a campaign where, it was anti-American, elbows up, me too. It was an anti-American campaign.
Michelle, what do you make of this? Because this disruption was started by that administration, and they seem to be taking the reaction personally.
Well, he also seems to be conflating some of his slogans there, but in any case, I think that they might just be feeling it in terms of the tourist dollars. You look at the airlines are certainly having to revise all of their projections, and you think about Florida, California, Arizona, Texas. Like, Canadians, anecdotally don't seem to be wanting to go down there, and certainly the border numbers are showing that. And it's kind of ironic that he wants to blame Canadians for it, he clearly knows who his boss is and who he has to speak to on that. But to me, it is just a signal that he is feeling that Canadians aren't as open necessarily to American goods and to American consumerism. So, I'm not sure where that gets us in the end, to be honest. It's kind of, around that trade table and whatever's happening with Dominic LeBlanc and the rest of the negotiators, whether that is part of the discussion or not, it's interesting. But I can hardly say that Canadians are just going to play nice just to think that you're just going to get along with somebody who's been bullying us.
Yeah, JP Tasker is going to be in the show in the second hour, and he's got a good breakdown of just the consumer habit change and the travel habit, and it's seismic in just how much Canadians are turning away from that market. But Peter McKay, what do you make of this? They reach out to Mexico to try to build that bilateral relationship. I wonder how the Americans will react to this sort of thing, and especially when they're taking sort of the response of the Canadian consumer so personally, it seems.
Yeah, the ambassador, I think, is creating an alternative narrative here. And not that it matters anymore, but they started it. And let's be clear about that.
Yes, they did.
And secondly, David, I mean, these slogans and continuing down this road of mutually assured destruction on beating up on each other's economy, and especially for Canada, we're not going to win that fight. No. We're going to pay the biggest price. And so I think we have to really move away from that and rely on some of the institutional connective tissue that we have as countries. When I think of state to province, when I think of military to military, when I think of many of the cross-border boards of commerce, those are the relationships that are going to get us through what is a rough patch. And let's not forget, we've been here before. We've seen this before. I mean, it seems...
Have we seen this before?
Well, not to the extent, perhaps.
Yeah.
But we've had presidents and prime ministers that did not get along. We've had times in our history when we were at odds. Look, I think it's important to remember it's a moment in time, albeit historic, albeit ugly in many ways. But we're better than this, and I think it's time that we started really trying to focus on the better angels. And what makes our countries better is working together on security, on economy, on borders, on working to protect our citizens' best interest.
Right.
That is really where I would like to see a lot of the focus, not the escalation, not ratcheting it up, and not doing what I just said. It's saying we started it. But we
But Andrew, I mean, they did start it, and this is not the first time the ambassador, not even this week. Like, this is his consistent message at a lot of his public events right across the country, sort of pushing this counter narrative that essentially they're the aggrieved party in what is happening here. I mean, what does that tell us, do you think, about where things are with Canada and the U.S.?
Well, first of all, I think it shows that the actions Canadian consumers have been taking are having an impact. I mean, that loud whining that we're hearing from the ambassador is certainly, within the tone that what Trump is obviously feeling. They are feeling an impact. They, at some point, will need to decide whether or not that is something they want to correct or simply leave as is. I'm not sure I completely agree with Peter because if you follow through Peter's line of thinking, we end up pretty close back to where Pierre Poilievre was at the start, which was, let's not get into the fight, let's just capitulate and follow all the rules that they've set out for us on, whatever their grievances are. And I don't think that that's where the Canadian public's at. The one other big question here, and I think this may be at play with the Washington ambassador, the American ambassador to us, is that they are also working to develop a wedge between us and Mexico, certainly as we go into CUSMA. If we think about the last time this happened, and I know this isn't part of the Canadian narrative, but it was very much the case, Canada was left out of those negotiating rooms as the agreement was being worked through. We were essentially brought in at the very last minute by asking to come back to the table, and they said, this is essentially the deal with Mexico, sign it or don't sign it. And the concessions we got were relatively small. Not unimportant, certainly around the dispute mechanism, but really the bulk of that deal had already been cut, and I think that's what the Americans are hoping they can do again.
Tanda, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, look, when I was in television working as a reporter, I loved Americans and Newfoundlanders for the ability to talk in quotes from the gut, good clips. And I think Mr. Hoekstra, Ambassador Hoekstra, is doing a little bit of that, speaking from the gut. One of the things that really, really has bothered him and the entire administration is this notion that we've taken American alcohol off shelves. Put it out there and tariff the life out of it if you want to, but put it on the shelves. They're bothered by the flex of power, of consumer power of Canadians. They're bothered by the political flex that premiers have brought to the table. But all's fair in love and a trade war is probably what the premiers think and what the government thinks. To the point about whether the Conservatives are saying capitulate, I don't think anyone in Canada is saying capitulate to Trump. I think quite the opposite, actually. There may be different approaches to how, but everybody, all the political parties backed tariffs when they were on, and there's some disagreement perhaps about to what extent they should have been taken off. But look, this is a work in progress, the whole negotiation. So I do think, though, to the point about whether we can work together with Mexico as opposed to at one point in the late stages of the NAFTA renegotiation, there were tensions, and yes, Canada and Mexico each at one point looked like they were trying to go it alone.
Right.
But in the end, they came together, the negotiators were talking, the leaders talked, and they succeeded because they were united. And I think that still remains the challenge.
Yeah, I think there was this kind of uncoordinated rush to appease Trump early in the tariff fight because people believed if we just give him this, it will all go away. And I think it's become very clear there is no magical threshold of appeasement. That this is, a core tenet of trade and financial
There's
policy.
still dispute. Should we be slapping tariffs at some point? Should we ever try to leverage our oil exports to the U.S.? Look, that's going to be an ongoing source of contention here, but that's not on the table now. It's all been talked about.
Turning off the lights, as
Yes,
and
no one's turned off the lights yet.
Sucked back pretty quickly, and as were some of the tariffs that were placed on by the current government, and let's not forget the digital services tax. So that was all elbows down, and it wasn't the Conservative Party that did that.
No, but I guess my point is that at the beginning of the year and during the election, I think we all kind of thought it was a leverage play to get specific things. And it's very clear it's not that now, right? So you can't keep your posture from January when the facts are different in September because, there's tariffs on everybody now, and it's a